Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting for 16th of November 2021. Do we have any comments for absence? Do we have any declarations of interest and items on the agenda? No, thank you. Have we received any written requests for dispensation for disposable pecuniary interest? No need to grant any requests. Have we had any requests for public participation? Okay, to approve the draft open minutes of the Finance and Audit Committee held on the 7th of September 2021. Do I have any matters or queries arising from those minutes? No? Okay. Can I then please have a show of one hand each to approve the consensus of the minutes? Thanks very much. Moving on to the Town Clerk's open report, pages 1-7, appendices A to F. 7.1 to C, management accounts for the period 1st of April 2021 to 31st of October 2021. Together with their various appendices for comparison and analysis. We are noting reports, not voting on them. So, do we have any queries or matters arising? As this is in a period of discussion, and we have a meeting on Thursday to again review them. Oh no, that's the budget department. So, gathering ahead. So we know matters or interest questions arising from the management accounts. I'm happy to note. Yep. Okay, thanks very much. And to review the latest draft budget for 22-23. Okay. We are to review the financial implications arising from the initial budget reviews by the other standard committees and to recommend any amendments that fall within our remit that can be made to the draft budget to facilitate an acceptable preset level. At our previous meeting, we agreed that the strategy should be cautious, aiming to return to the balance budgets after the various works and projects we've been involved in. Have had first draft budgets from several committees, and the proposals have been updated following officer review and the draft budgets by the committees. So we are again requested to note the following. The budget will change and the tax base will not be confirmed until December. At where we stand at the moment, there is expected to be a drawdown on reserves in 22-23 to fund proposed expenditure. At the moment, this is shown at £40,000. Progress has been made because obviously that has about half the initial level of drawing from reserves. We have an estimate of the tax base. Obviously, we're waiting for the final numbers to come through. In the draft budget, the annual charge rate has been set at 2.5% increase. And this is obviously for us to debate and decide. We also are expecting the expenditure on town hall maintenance to be completed within the next couple of months, but also to remember we need to carry a 5% retention fee. We are expecting the final budget to be recommended to the Town Council in January.
Yeah, just a quick question on the retention. So I was understanding, I guess, We're retaining 5% of the sum that we owe to the builders as a warranty, effectively, for the next 12 months, and that becomes releasable once that. Yeah, once the work is complete. When's the work due to complete? Is it 2 months' time? So it's probably going to be in January. So we'd be releasing that retention in 2023.
Yeah, there should be 2 more invoices.
Yeah.
So the work. The final invoice should be in January next year, so 12 months from that will be in 2023. So there's £10,000 in the town maintenance pot, which effectively hopefully will cover that retention. But we won't know the final figure.
So it's finished.
And is there any update on the additional funding and negotiation for the extra work? Has that progressed?
I haven't got an update for this meeting about that. I hope there's be some more information before townhouse meeting next week. Site visit or site review. As was, I think, was said at that evening discussions and pre-consultation on the additional costs, it may well be that those additional sums to complete the extra work will be covered by underspends elsewhere in this budget. So at the moment, I haven't asked for you to consider a environment in the current year because that might not be needed. We'll possibly that in January before the final budget's set next year.
Can I just clarify? It says this committee is responsible for some of the items, or we have some things under our control. What does that refer to, and what are we able to?
Yeah, so in Appendix E, that's the finance and audit version of the draft budget. So all the committee versions have the initial summary, effectively for council as a whole. Effectively, there's a limited number of things that finance and audit can sort of contribute towards discussions. And this is based on some of these are effectively appropriate to all committees, so they might have already been highlighted at other committees, but essentially it's a very short subset. If you want me to run through any of those, I'll perhaps just make a couple of comments. Just some notes on changes in the third draft. The figure for professional fees has been reduced. A review of actuals last year showed that there were considerable additional professional fees for health and safety advice during the coronavirus pandemic. So there's been some. Also, some of the surplus in this budget is used to cover the fees incurred, architects' fees and quantity surveyor fees for the plant maintenance. So that hopefully will drop off next year because the maintenance work should be completed before that. The other item to note on payroll services, the budget from the previous year was set. Members may recall, or actually, I think when some of you joined council, I was actually off on long-term absence. So a provision being made to outsource the payroll, which is an activity that I normally do, and it's all the payroll work is covered by our accountants. But with me being back on board, so to speak, I've been doing payroll, all the payroll approval things this year, and so that has reduced the additional sums that the payroll bureau would have been charging. Bank charges and interest is creeping up slightly. That figure is based on year-to-date actuals, but members are reminded that because the reserves that are available to council are gradually being drawn down, there is less money available for investment. So that figure may well fluctuate next year, and also is heavily dependent on what happens with interest rates. The contingency for inflation figure there, I'll just emphasise that is for the whole category of operation administration, not just for the items shown in the summary. So, and that doesn't apply to all the items within that group. It has been applied appropriately.
May I ask a question about, sorry.
Just a few questions about those. I was just picking up on the contingency. You just mentioned, Phil, to me it seemed very, very low against the overall figure. It's only sort of 1.5%. I just wonder how, I said if I'm very much, I would put in a much larger contingency than that. I just wonder how that's calculated. And I've got a few other questions if I could check. That's in the appendix C.
Yeah, so if I open the spreadsheet, then I'll see how the figures calculated.
Was the contingency for inflation? Yes.
So there is a lot of things that have been increased by inflation based on the RPI figure from August last year, which was 4.8%. I think current expectations are that inflation could rise at least 5%, higher, but I think it's hoped it will fall back later next year. Scroll through to operational and admin. So in this section, you can see there are more items in there than in the snapshot for the finance committee. So it doesn't. There are things in here, for example, salaries, wages, and related costs. They've had a separate uplift figure applied to them in anticipation of pay rises, which may or may not be approved. So it doesn't include that contingency figure, as I said, it doesn't include all of the items within the category, because some of those are based on contractual rates. For example, the insurance premium, because we're in a long-term agreement, we know what the cost would be. We don't have to know.
So you're happy with that as a reasonable contingency?
Yeah, it's basically inflationary uplift applied to some of the expenditure in that group. The contingency is also applied elsewhere in the budget, so the contingency as a whole you see here the contingency across all categories is 8,000. So that includes other sections, subsections.
So just my initial reading of it was that it seemed a very low contingency for the overall budget, but that's the helpful explanation. Can I just pick up a couple of other points, just a couple of other thoughts really. The percentage increase for precept is well under the rate of inflation. And I also noticed that the 2.6, the proposed salary increases, I believe, is only 1.5%.
Yeah.
Which is effectively a cut of 3.5%. And I just sort of throw that open to the committee as to whether we are happy with that.
Well, to the salaries,
yes,
we don't get a choice in that. That's dictated to by local authority. It's not our
It's
choice.
So the 1.5% for the current financial year still hasn't been approved. So following on from the back of public sector pay freeze, so there was a 1.5% offer which the unions haven't accepted as yet. So that hasn't been applied. And personnel committee for next year proposed a contingency of 1.75 for next year, but as you say, that's
Where is the,
Is outside it's outside the remit of the town council to set the
that's why the unions haven't accepted that, if the negotiation, if there is sufficient contingency, if the government does have to back down and give actually a reasonable payment to the public sector.
at the moment. The figures there allow for 1.5%.
That's not the way budgets are done, man.
No, they wait for you to do the budget, then
Yeah.
you put salaries up.
Remember what the budget is about. We need to be as accurate as we can be on what we know at the moment.
Well, it's
With a reasonable information of those things which are within our control and our decision making, right or wrong.
And the 2.5% change in the precept that's just carried the figure over from the current year, but it's not a recommendation, it's not a indication of what the council decides to do. That is obviously within the power of councils to determine whether they want to place it at all or place it not.
So I'm looking at civic expenditure. We had a discussion of this about this at civic heritage and events. And you provided back in the detail on several months back to comparisons with 15-16. But actually, probably the most realistic comparison is maybe 1920 or 1890, which is probably in there, so I can't see it. But if I take 15-16, 35,369, do a very reasonable 3% plus each year, that would get us to about 43,000. We're budgeting for 55,700. Now, I know there was a discussion, and I presume that was fed back and we made adjustments accordingly. I do wonder about civic expenditure, and I do wonder whether we can keep on growing this pot of money as an expenditure for areas which may not necessarily benefit the residents of Stratford-upon-Avon. I think we need to be very cautious about that, particularly when I look at your figures on 15-16. And this depends upon how much I know the mayor spend or the mayor doesn't spend, how much we spend on civic regalia and so on and so forth. And I think I expressed my views at the civic heritage and events. I feel more, if we are going to be looking at an area where expenditure could be reduced in a very tight year, that's an area we should look at in more detail.
Respond to that. There's a couple of items that have specifically increased that substantially is that the contribution the town council used to make to the birthday celebrations was 15,000 a year, and that was uplifted to 25,000. Although I know from the latest meeting they proposed that that is dropped to 20. The other thing that's in the current year's budget that didn't used to be there is event security, which in light of the terrorist attacks that took place a few years ago, the first few events that followed that incurred substantial vehicle mitigation, vehicle mitigation for anti-terrorism things that essentially cost a lot more money than.
That's not in it, that those aren't costs that were repeated this year.
Well, they've been,
Which when I look at to be able to find that.
So in this civic section, you'll see there's 7,500 included in next year's budget for event security. Now that was the figure applied in this year's budget, but because of the cancellation of most of the season's events, that effectively is a sort of contingency towards security costs and hasn't been incurred to date this year because, for example, the birthday celebrations was actually cancelled this year, so it was a virtual event. I believe the Remembrance Parade this weekend is possibly the first bigger scale public event that's taken place. But effectively, because of the nature of that event, the security costs around that are less complex or expensive, shall we say, because obviously the birthday celebrations takes up a bigger section of the town. So the 7,500 there, if you look back to 2016, there wouldn't have been a figure at all for event security. It would have just been covered by the costs budgeted for events to take place. As I say, the biggest security cost in the past has tended to be the birthday celebrations, and that obviously has its own separate section in the budget.
Council's contributions are limited to this figure. So next year's figure has been proposed to reduce down to 20,000. As I said, 5 years ago that was only 15,000.
There's some other sort of slight increases compared to before. The mayor's allowance was probably last set back in 2015. And we set it a value that's been repeated year on year, but again over the last few years, because of the cancellation of civic events, the mayor hasn't spent his full allowance.
There's travelling again because of lack of civic events. There's travelling budgets. There was certainly not spent last year, and again, it's much financial year.
The honoraria payments have increased in line with pay rises, but that is relatively small amount of the total budget. So that, as I said, the key increases, if you like, have been on event security.
The question though is now 55,000 to 50 in a year which is going to be financially tight. Can we justify that? And that's a question we have to look at.
Clarify the discussion, the wider discussion on the budget expenditure for 2023 will be on Thursday, and actually this committee is really just reviewing our proposed budget expenditure for those items which are within our control. And as far as I can see, I would say that none of that expenditure is discretionary spend. We will incur it because bank charges will happen. So I don't think there's any scope for us to make any decisions on our budget expenditure. And that's where we are.
Yeah, I think an item that we'll come on to next is considered an item of additional expenditure. It's really for this committee to try to determine where other items may be funded from, or for example, in trying to address the existing deficit, whether this committee believes that because of the level reserves, it is sufficient to cover the deficit going into next year, or whether this committee believes the precept should be raised by a certain amount. So those are the sort of things that will ultimately be recommended to Town Council. But as you say, the meeting on Thursday will allow people from all committees, so councillors from all committees, to have a say on what they believe they can.
But we, this committee, were comfortable that our proposed budget expenditure is correct. Yeah, that's my view. That's my view. Yeah, sorry, that's it.
Can I just say that also this committee here, we are the experts in finance, just as personnel is the expert in personnel. So if we were, as a committee, to feel uncomfortable about a proposition put forward by one of the other committees in financial terms, we're not here to understand that. We're here to cast as critical friends, as critical eye over it, because otherwise the budget will just drift away. So if we were, I'm not saying we are, taking civic expenditure, if we felt that there were areas there that civic heritage and events were overexpending on, maybe even underexpending on, it would be our job as the experts in finance, and I would appreciate one of you for having this meeting on Thursday to help us all understand it better. We would be going back and saying at Town Council, well, we hear what you've said, but actually, as the experts in finance, this is not acceptable, justifiable for the following reasons. Otherwise, all we're doing is rubber stamping without any critical overview the committee's inputs. And that's, if we're only here to rubber stamp, well then we are impotent. We're not an effective committee.
I think this is part of the change to the new way of working, which obviously probably would have taken earlier, but due to world events, it's slightly slowed down. But I think, you know, committees are setting their budgets, but equally we're the ones responsible for finance. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for us as councillors to have those conversations with each other, so that we end up with a same level of expenditure, with a review of how we're going to fund it, and
the input and discussion between yourselves, councillors, as well as committees. Do this thing, achieve what we want to achieve.
Which is a balanced budget.
Yes. Obviously, then the discussions for what do we want, that's another year. So there we go.
Just pick up on so I'm not trying to be pedantic here at all, but you said that committees are setting their budgets. Are they setting their budgets or are they proposing their budgets? Because there is a for the count. My understanding is that we're inviting committees to propose their budgets, which council will not agree.
Yes, the finance committee would agree that town council as a whole in the meeting, you would be, as a town council, accepting budgets from all the committees.
Yes.
There will be lots of long hours that in an effective system, we would have had the conversations before it hits the final meeting to discuss it and then decide it.
Rather just be that
Yes.
point.
Yeah.
We mustn't be able
You must not-
to scrutinise
you
effectively.
must be present.
Yes.
Thank you. Do we have any other issues or items to discuss with us, or are we happy to allow these meetings and discussions to carry on to form the budget to accept later in the year? Yeah, we have to move on. Okay.
We're going to talk about.
I don't,
It'd be part of the budget review.
well, yes, it's part of the review, I think. I think it's part of that process. We want 6 million to raise a statute to council calls and how much we have to raise a precept. I mean, that it's rolled together in the same thing. Item 7.3 is to review the membership of the Warwickshire and West Midlands Association of Local Councils, WALC, and the National Association of Local Councils, NULC. And when be able to discuss it with the responsible financial officer, and one of the differences, obviously, draws open for discussion, but when we rejoined, we had essentially a discount on part of those membership fees, and so the NULC essentially was covered by WALC, so this is the reason for the difference between last year and this year's description. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, I think my question, the Appendix F shows is their version of the benefits to the council. But I think my question is, have the council made use of those potential benefits? If we're not using it, then there might be some benefits for not using it, seems a waste of money. If we are using it, then it's a good spend of money. So it's in a way, what's the town council usage of WELC?
I think that's probably a question more for the town clerk. But having said that, when in the town clerk's open report back in January, when the recommendation was it wasn't so much just because it's a fee. It was more a case of, the benefits are there. It's sort of, if you like, WALC can now support the council as opposed to SLCCs, Society of Local Council Clerks, which myself and the town clerk are members of, and that supports us as officers in our professional capacity. So just referring back to the town clerk's report back in January, she sort of commented on some of the benefits of being members, and a key thing that happened last year was that they were very active in trawling through all the information coming from government advice on, COVID responses. So effectively, they can do a lot of the legwork and push through recommendations about these are the things that you should be focusing on. I also know that that's next week, referring to a consultation, which again, can now raise that as a significant issue that would potentially affect council. So, if you like, by being members of there, they are drawing attention to issues that may potentially otherwise slip through the net.
Right. In that case, my question is the town clerk recommending that we continue? And I think the answer to that is yes, but
I believe so. I think the reason for the review here, if you like, is just, I guess, again, coming back to Councillor Ross's point, is that there's more money required to review membership. It isn't in the budget at the moment. Is this committee happy that it is financially justified to potentially increase the deficit to ensure that membership?
If we did decide to include it, is that an expenditure that falls within our remit as the fund?
Part of the subscription, so it's
So part of subscriptions, yeah, okay.
I think once again, it's the majority, yes.
I can't imagine the town council spend, and I would be very happy to go with her recommendation. If her recommendation is that we continue membership, then I'm very happy to support that.
Can I just make a point as well? Sorry, but more than that, with all these things, there's a kind of insurance policy. How much we use it depends upon how much we need to use it. So, for instance, just speculatively, if we were ever to be in a position where we were looking at maybe management structures or further recruitment at a senior level, just speculatively, we would be needing the support of WAC as a resource. And if they shut the door on us, we might find ourselves, for example, going to very expensive recruitment agencies. So that's just an example. So I think this is an invaluable resource. I mean, this is the biggest job they're going to experience, isn't it? Presumably they will have their normal modest inflation plus increases year on year. They're not going to jump again by fourfold. And I would say that WAC and the other areas that it involves, it's essential we participate.
Chair, I find this quite strange, actually. We've been members of WAC for many years. We actually left on the advice of the town clerk because they were of no use in basically the information and the town clerk still put a council and told us that the local association of clerks,
The society of local.
yeah, the Society of Local Council Clerks is a much better facility and much more useful for them. So I just find it quite strange that we rejoined, or had a strange we rejoined, we want to increase our, as the town council's representative on WALC for several years. I used to go to Warwick city meetings, and complete waste of time, and a little hierarchy that people often said that. So they decided to withdraw. That's all why we rejoined when the town clerk assured us that the Society of Local Clerks gave us much better advice than well.
Well, we could certainly ask. I mean, I think there was something in here, and I'm certainly aware that we have gone to them and consulted them for a couple of things. There is, I have a very vestigial memory of a conversation from the clerk about it, but I'm afraid we're lost in the mists of time.
I remember when she came to us, there was a clear indication that the quality of their support and service had increased. And they were accepted from what you said, Councillor Dowley, that the way they organise and run themselves now, from my understanding from the town clerk, it's not comparable with the way it was done before.
I mean, what I'm showing on the screen now, this was the town clerk's report from January at the start of the year when she recommended that council rejoin. The membership of SLCC is tied to the officer.
Yeah, we know that, but town clerk didn't say why she has advised us to rejoin WALC and the benefits that we got. Well, we were members of WALC for many years, we get any benefits at all.
If I can invite all councillors to look at confidential notes in the personnel report from about a month or 6 weeks ago, and they are confidential, we might explain why we may well be needing to organisations. But they are confidential, so. And they're there in your.
Well, we have to read and make a comment. It is kind of amazing. I've one page without any, but as it says, it's explained in the confidential version. I'll get
Well, I suppose again, review use and usefulness year on year from every year to make a decision about subscription.
Yeah, just a question on what's being asked then. So effectively in the report, it's basically asking whether to commit to, I guess it's a January to December commitment, and we have to subscribe, and there's no more meetings between now and January, I guess, with which the decision could be deferred to. So we've been asked to make the decision tonight. It needs to be basically budgeted as well.
The decision is whether to adjust the budget to include this.
Right.
I mean, if this needs to be on, if you like, on the town clerk's recommendation, for example, at town council next week,
Yeah.
if you say that subject to her confirmation that she supports this course of events, then it's really whether this committee is agreeing that the figure should be added.
Budgeted for.
Budgeted.
Budgeting doesn't necessarily mean commitment to it, so that's quite straightforward.
So, thank you. Just a quick question. And so, just looking at their website, can you just clarify, if you can, membership of WALC? Somebody said in the room, I'm not sure who, that the member is the town clerk.
No,
that's
the Society of Local Council.
Thank you. So the council is a member of the park. So actually, there are a lot of resources, training resources particularly, that we as members could potentially. So I think maybe that's something that if we, and there is additional, some of the costs, or some of the courses are at additional costs. There's probably some resources out there that will be free for members to use. So perhaps if we do rejoin on the recommendation, perhaps then all members could be reminded that it is a resource not just for the clerks, but also for members to use.
There are discounted training rates for the courses that they run. So the last few that councillors and officers have been on, they're sort of 50% discounted for being members. So obviously the more council takes advantage of the services that Canal offer, the cost of membership doesn't increase unless it's to lay on.
So following on from that, if we were to encourage all councillors to use the resource more actively, should there be a modest budget in there for additional training? If the resource is there, then really we'd be we'd be making more use of it and actually getting better value rather than just paying more membership. So
there is actually a separate entry for training within the budget, so it's not brilliant.
Thank you.
Can I suggest, can I ask then that we recommend that continued membership be put into the budget so that those costs can be included, we can see the effect on the budget, and then presumably the town clerk can confirm the recommendation at the town meeting next week. Is everybody happy with that? Thank you. Yeah, okay, thanks very much. Okay, 7.4 to review the council's investment strategy. Yeah.
Thank you. As I've sort of said in my report, this committee need to consider on an annual basis the investment strategy of the council. You will recall in previous years we've been fortunate because of the level of reserves to have created a system effectively of a sort of rolling cycle of renewed investment, which has enabled the interest rates or the interest received on the monies invested to be substantially more than if the money had just been left idly in the bank accounts. The current situation is that 2 of these long-term fixed rate bonds are due to mature in the next months. So one at the end of November and one at the beginning of December. When this has happened in previous years, the recommendation has been to reinvest either all or the majority of those funds back into other fixed rate bonds to secure a higher return. Unfortunately, the situation this year is that because of the very large deficit that is expected in the current financial year, to reinvest a lot of this money in long-term bonds would restrict the council's ability to fund the deficit going forward, and will potentially cause it to have to, for example, withdraw funds from the property fund, which has always been seen as the long-term place to hold the rainy day funds that hopefully will not be required at any time in the immediate future. So council still has £250,000 in that in the local authority property fund that is getting the highest return, because the dividend yield is over 4%, which is substantially more than any interest rate you can earn from a sort of savings account. Given that the deficit at this stage is still looking potentially as though it could be £300,000 for the current year, then the combined value of these maturing bonds, a lot of that money, so it's, I think it's, just check the notes, we've got just over 100,000 coming back at the end of this month, and then a further 132,000 coming back in December. Essentially, what I'm advising you is that most of that money will be needed to fund the deficit this year. It may be that when the year end comes, because of understands elsewhere in the budget, the deficit is not as great as it might well be. And my recommendation then, or my suggestion then, would be potentially to review after year end whether there is a surplus of, a deficit is less than anticipated. So there is money left sitting in the bank account or in a short term investment that could be invested long term going forward. But at the moment, my recommendation in the report is that if it's put into the 31-day notice account, it will get a much higher rate of interest than leaving it in the bank account, but can still be drawn down at 31 days notice, which is plenty of notice in order to fulfil the cash flow requirements.
I'd like to make a proposal that we follow that recommendation.
You sent another document out about it's a good time to invest in green. There was an email. Yeah.
Right, that was an update from CCLA.
Yes, it was. Do we get a choice what we're going to invest in the short term campaign time? Are we looking now though? We don't want to go like everybody. Our principles soon fade away when we don't make much money. But are we looking at any of these things? Or are we being advised? We have to talk, didn't we?
Yeah, I believe that from the presentation in Mark Davis, our business manager, he sort of said that CCLA are pursuing initiatives for green investments. I believe it was Councillor Jackson who sort of said that saying what's investment, or we rely on your expertise to follow the correct course. And I think the situation is that essentially by investing money in CCLA, you trust them to invest it in appropriate. So my review hasn't looked at considering other potentially greener investments elsewhere.
On the basis of being a 30-day pullout, if something comes up.
Yeah, that's essentially, if you like, the investment strategy is required to be reviewed annually. But what I'm saying here is that I think at the moment we need to be prudent and ensure the funds are available. But there's nothing to stop council reviewing the situation in 3 months' time or 6 months' time and switching the money back at that stage if it's felt that there are sufficient funds to reinvest in other longer term considerations.
That's what did you?
Yes, thank you. I mean, just a query, I'm sure, Phil. I know I'm aware that there are incredibly low interest rates around for local government organisations to borrow from. would this council be able to borrow? It's just that if we were able to borrow at a rate of 0.5%.
It was asked.
I thought it had been.
Yeah, but basically, if council has reserves, then you can't apply.
That does mean some
Effectively, then it could become an investment or a vehicle, rather than, borrowing money on the cheap and investing in high return. It's not really the driver. It shouldn't be the driver for a local council.
Okay, so I do have a proposal in the secondary. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to add that the CCLA investment has proved very, very profitable since we first started it. And does come quite regularly. I'm sure if the committee wanted me to come and some now, it'll come and tell us about it for you. And 4.04% at the moment, that's excellent. And it has been higher. And obviously it was hit really hard by COVID, but it's picking up quite nicely now. And it's the best ever it's not quite mine. Go back to your chair with the proposal.
Right, is everyone happy to accept the proposal? Thank you very much. So, a responsible finance officer's verbal report information union.
And it's just one item to draw attention to. I believe you've been notified earlier in the month that we've received the latest SIL monies from the district council, which is the largest half-yearly sum we've received so far. So that's very welcome. That means the current balance in the SIL pot going forward is just under 29, just over 29,500. I think council has already agreed that the strategy is to build that pot and then review projects going forward. But, obviously, that funding did enable council to undertake the strategic partnership initiative on the Bridge Street and High Street design in the last 6 months, I think. So that's some good news and unexpected additional money.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask, after I draw the meeting to a close, there was something we just need to discuss confidentially. So if we have no other items, then thank you for coming. The date, time, and venue for the next meeting is Tuesday, the 18th of January, at 6:30 at the Town Hall. Doing well, and thank you very much for attending this evening.